Hello, my name is Helen Gunter. I work at Newcastle University. One of my key responsibilities is promoting postgraduate funding for potential students. What I'm going to be talking about today is funding for 2017 entry start, and I'm going to be referring to master's level students and PhD students. Okay, so to give you an outline of the presentation, I'll be giving you a few funding tips, talk about the living expenses, tuition fees, and also funding sources. So that's going to be for UK, EU, and international students. And I'm also going to be giving you a brief overview of the tuition fee discount schemes at our university. Funding tips. When you're looking at a funding advert, sometimes they refer to it as a fully funded scheme or a partially funded scheme. Fully funded, this is a gold standard, so a full funding advert or scheme is where you get all of your fees paid for and you get your living expenses covered. Partial funding, this does vary considerably, so you may get all of your fees paid for but no living expenses, or you may get some of your fees paid for and then you have to cover the rest of it. So just to be aware when you're looking at what funding's available that they do fall into either a full or a partial category. Portfolio funding, so if you're not fortunate enough to get full funding for your postgraduate course, then some students do approach it via this portfolio funding. This is where you bring in pots of money from different sources. So it could be that you've obtained a partial scholarship, you've also got some personal savings, part-time work, and you may also get some funding from a charity. So some of the students that we've met have actually been very tenacious and pulled all this funding together in terms of a package to support them through their studies. Offer of a place, now this is not available or appropriate for everything, but sometimes you actually do need to have an offer of a place to be able to apply for funding. So the funding body expects you to have had your place confirmed before they will let you apply for the funding. So when you're thinking about the deadline for the funding scheme, you need to factor in the fact that you've already got to have applied for a place on a course. Start your search for funding early, so as early as possible. So a lot of the funding schemes start to be announced from about October, November of the year before you start. The majority are advertised between about December and March, so it's really key to start looking around those dates. Please don't leave it until you've graduated or summertime, because a lot of the funding has already been allocated by then. So the earlier the better. The eligibility criteria does vary enormously. So again, don't expect to see the same eligibility across different funding schemes. So always check the entry requirements. If you're not a native English speaker, check the IELTS or the English language requirements. And also, for example, your country of origin. Some of these factors do vary across the different funding schemes. And I've given some links below to where you can find funding information at Newcastle University. So that's our main funding site, the postgraduate funding. We also provide typical sources of funding on every single course at the university. And also, we've got the final link there, the academic link, and that's where you may find some extra funding sources on the academic school or faculty websites. It's always really useful to speak to your prospective school. So, for example, they may know about funding that's coming through that hasn't been advertised yet. And so they'll, talking to your potential academic or a school secretary, for example, you may find some extra information that's not yet available on the website. And also talk to current students on the course that you're interested in. Again, they have already managed to get the funding and they may know some extra places to try and look for the funding. Okay, so if you're thinking about budgeting, then living expenses is a key thing. So I've got some figures here for UK students and EU international students starting in 2017. So the key difference is if you're thinking about a budget that you used as an undergraduate student, you may need to rethink this, because a typical undergraduate year is 9 months, a typical postgraduate academic year is 12 months. So it may cost you more to study as a postgraduate student. So those are the typical figures there. EU international students, we've got a slightly higher figure quoted there, and that's to encompass things like international travel, higher mobile phone bills, etc. So that link will give you a good idea about things like mobile phone costs, rent, food that you're likely to have to pay for. These figures do not include tuition fees, they're just living expenses. Tuition fees. So all of our fees for our postgraduate courses are listed on our central postgraduate website, and that's the link there. But just to give you a quick overview of the fees, for full-time research fees, so I'm talking here typically about PhDs, MPhils, etc. For some of our courses, we actually quote a range of fees. So here we've got from about 4,000 to 14,000 for UK EU students and 12 to 26 for our international students. The reason that we have to do this is that PhDs especially are very specific and sometimes very unique, and they have different resource requirements, different equipment requirements, and therefore we can't tell you on the central website what fee you're going to pay. It would be a discussion with your supervisor, and then when you get your offer letter through, that's when we will confirm the exact fee you'll be paying for a research degree, a PhD. In terms of typical full-time taught fees, for humanities and social sciences, you'll see that the fees are slightly less than for science, engineering, medical. And again, that's down to extra resource requirements and equipment costs. But if you go online, you'll have the exact fee for each course quoted. So in addition to tuition fees, you may need to consider additional course-related expenses which may not be covered by your tuition fees. So here I'm talking about things like field trips, books and specialist equipment. So again, just to factor those into your budget. So now I'm going to be talking about actual sources of funding rather than funding in general. So I'll start with master's level funding for UK and EU students. So in 2016, the government introduced a postgraduate master's loan scheme. So for students starting in 2016, it was up to £10,000. For students starting in 2017, it will now be £10,280. So you don't have to borrow the full amount, you can borrow anything up to that full amount. As the name suggests, it's just for master's level courses, and that's research masters and taught masters. So research masters, things like MPhil courses, MLit courses, taught courses, courses like MAs and MScs. It does not cover certificate courses, diploma courses or PhDs. It covers the majority of full-time and part-time courses. There are some very atypical part-time courses that are delivered over a number of years, and some of those aren't eligible, so always check with your school to see if they're eligible or not. They're non-means tested, and repayment is typically the April following the year in which you complete your course. It's for students who are ordinary resident in England and also some eligible EU students. So if you've already got a master's level qualification, then you aren't eligible to get this master's level funding. So I've put a link there to more information about the scheme. In addition to the loan scheme, I've just flagged up here scholarships. So we do offer at the university a number of scholarships for our UK EU students, and these are provided by the university, but there are also external organisations which provide master's level funding. So again, that information will be on our website. PhD funding for UK EU students. One of the biggest funders for PhD students are the research councils. So there's 7 research councils altogether, and they cover a huge range of subject areas. And one of the aims of these research councils is to support research in the UK, and part of that is to support PhD students. Now, when you're looking at adverts, you'll see across a number of different websites the doctoral training partnerships, the DTPs, and doctoral training centres, the DTCs. So these basically describe where academic schools come together to provide a funding scheme, or where groups of universities come together to provide funding for PhD students. And the benefit as a student is you're going to have access to lots of different academics, you get the cross-disciplinary expertise, you are part of a cohort, so you're mixing with lots of other students, you get to go on conferences, you get to go on research workshops, for example. So it's that combined expertise and that chance to meet other students. Many of the big schemes, research council schemes, the closing dates are in about January, February, so they are quite early. But other individual studentships where you're not part of a DTC or a DTP are offered throughout the year, so always just keep your eye out if you've missed those deadlines. The academic schools at Newcastle University and faculties also do provide some funding for PhD students. So again, just always keep looking online, because when we update the funding database, we're seeing every week some different funding schemes coming through. So just keep on looking. Looking into the future, so if you're thinking about starting in 2018, the government are going to start up a postgraduate PhD loan scheme. This is up to £25,000 that you can borrow, obviously a higher amount than the master's scheme because a PhD lasts for 3 years. It's just for English resident students, and it's just for students who can't obtain Research Council funding, and there's some more information there in the link below. General funding, so I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but to flag up that if you have children, or if you have a disability, or if you're thinking about applying for a PGCE, a teaching qualification, then we have links there to more specialist information. And now coming on to funding for our non-EU international students. So the university has a range of schemes. So we have our Newcastle University Overseas Research Scholarship. This is for PhD students, and this is in all subject areas. So it's a tuition fee discount between £7,000 and £11,000, and that depends on the type of PhD that you're undertaking. As I mentioned before, this is a partial scholarship, so you would have to make up the rest of your fees and also living expenses. As I've talked about before, for UK EU students, then the school and faculties offer PhD studentships. These studentships typically cover fees and living expenses, or fees only, and sometimes they're offered to UK, EU and international students. So always check the eligibility criteria. We introduced for 2017 the Vice-Chancellor's Scholarship. This is a £3,000 tuition fee discount, and this is for master's level study across all of our subject areas. Medical Sciences, we've got a Medical Sciences International Masters Excellence Scholarship, and this covers all of the MRes, the Master of Research courses in the Medical Sciences faculty, and also the MSc in Medical Sciences. And again, that's a partial scholarship of £1,500 off your tuition fees. And the schools also offer a range of scholarships and studentships for our international students. So again, just being tenacious, looking at all the different funding available on central website and school websites. And there are a wide range of external scholarships. We do have some of them on our central website, but again, we don't capture everything, so you'll need to do some detective work. So government-funded schemes, so asking, if you're an international student, asking your government in your own country about any funding available. We have things like the Fulbright, the Commonwealth Shared Scholarships, and some of these do provide full funding. So they're very competitive, but you will get all your expenses paid for. Charities and trusts, so not a lot of people know about these different funding bodies when they're thinking about funding postgraduate studies. We have met a lot of students who again have done a lot of detective work and have actually acquired funding from these organisations. So I've just listed below a number of different organisations and the relevant web links. So they typically don't provide full funding for your PhD or master's level study, but some may. They're normally smaller pots of money, less than £1,000. But again, if you're thinking about portfolio funding, these could be really useful organisations to get some extra money together. The eligibility criteria, application process will vary enormously. So if you are applying to a number of organisations, it will take time, but hopefully it'll be worth it. Tuition fee discount schemes. So this will vary at different universities. At Newcastle University, if you've done a full undergraduate degree with us or a master's level degree and you're going on to a PhD, we provide an alumni tuition fee discount for the majority of the courses that we offer. That's a 20% discount on tuition fees for self-funded and partially funded students. Our international family discount, you get a 10% reduction, and that's for close relatives of international students. So it doesn't cover cousins twice removed, it has to be an immediate family member. Early payment discount, so if you are able to pay your annual fee in full by the end of registration week, you do get a 2% discount on your tuition fees. The university also offers fee payment instalments, so this will vary across different universities, but at Newcastle, for our research and our non-EU international students, you pay in 2 annual fee instalments, and that's at registration and in January. And for our UK and EU taught students, you pay in 6 instalments over the year, and more information can be found at the link below. So thanks for listening, and I hope you found that useful.